Hey guys, Mindful Morgan here. I've got a bit of a scratchy throat, so you'll just have to ignore that. The mixture of allergies and the weather, it's just not a good combination. I've been taking some Claritin to help, but my throat is very, very aggravated. So, anyways, today's topic is kind of a serious one, as you have probably figured out from the video name. I wanted to talk about the connection that society seems so eager to draw between mental illness and gun violence. Now, whenever we have an episode of gun violence, such as the tragic shooting that just happened in Florida, we're very quick to start talking about, mental illness, particularly if the shooter is white. If the shooter is a person of color, well then, they're a terrorist. But we don't tend to give white people the same treatment. We try and find a way and say, oh, well, they were just mentally ill. And I think that is a very dangerous stigma to be pressing onto people, not only because it's racist, but because it paints us as dangerous. And I'm bipolar. I'm one of the crazy kids. I would never do something like that to hurt people. And most mentally ill people are like that. We're just really sweet and we don't want to hurt people. And then there are mental illnesses that come with outbursts of anger that, that can't be really controlled. But those outbursts of anger do not tend to lead to gun violence. In fact, mentally ill people are about 14 times more likely to be on the receiving end of the violence, particularly people who suffer from schizophrenia, because they are seen as dangerous, which is dangerous for them. Their delusions and psychosis just scares people. People aren't willing to try and understand what's going on in the schizophrenic's head. And that is probably why there's so much just stigma against them. And the violence is just really unreal if you are a person with schizophrenia. So I wanted to take the time to get into a shooter's head. So I'm going to read you something I found off of Twitter. Now, if I have ever helped you or touched you in some way, then please consider, as a personal favor to me, finding this tweet on my account and spread it like wildfire. Okay, now this was written by a man named Daniel Riley. He says, I almost shot my classmates when I was 14 years old. I was not mentally ill. I had no juvenile criminal record. I'd never been suspended from school. I was a straight-A student. I almost shot my classmates because I experienced a moment of powerlessness and rage, like many teenagers do, and I had access to firearms. The problem started when I was in 9th grade. I took advanced foreign language classes, which meant I attended high school for first period, then took a separate bus from high school to my junior high. I was the youngest kid on the high school bus, and I had no friends in high school. That made me an easy target for a bully named Kyle. Ninth grade was already a bad year for me because my parents were getting divorced. Kyle turned it into a living hell. He insistently teased me, slapped the back of my head, shoved me out of my seat, and made me a spectacle for everyone's amusement and derision. One day, I'd finally had enough. I can't remember what Kyle did or said, but I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed him by the throat and lifted him out of his seat and shook him like a rag doll while seething through clenched teeth. "Stop messing with me." Then I tossed him back into his seat. I thought that had ended it. I thought he'd stop bullying me after that. I was wrong. After school, a bunch of older kids I didn't recognize started boarding my bus. Just before the bus pulled away from my junior high, Kyle waltzed up the steps, grinning. He pointed directly at me and said, "That's him." It turns out Kyle and his friends had driven from the high school to the junior high so they could ride my bus home with me and beat me. The entire trip, they laughed and bragged about how they were going to kick the crap out of me when we got to my bus stop. I had a long time to think about what I was going to do, and I decided that even though I was going to get a beat down, I wasn't going to run, and I wasn't going to cry. I was just going to calmly get off the bus and start walking home. I figured they'd jump me as soon as the bus had pulled around the corner and was out of sight. My hands are shaking as I write this. It's been over 20 years, and I still feel a sense of helplessness and rage when I think about that day. The bus pulled up to my stop, and I got off. The swarm of high school kids piled off the bus behind me. As the bus pulled away, one of them shoved me from behind. I kept walking. They circled me, yelling and making threats. But something strange happened. None of them took a swing at me. I got to my house, put my key in the door as they stood behind me laughing, and I walked right in. When they realized there were no adults in the house, they started circling the building, banging on the doors and walls, and yelling at me to come out and fight them. So I went upstairs, and I got a shotgun. I checked to make sure it was loaded, then I released the safety and chambered a shell. I walked back downstairs and held the barrel against the front door as some of these kids stood on the porch, pounding and yelling at me to let them in. I began to squeeze the trigger, anticipating the blast would penetrate the door and knock these kids to the ground. Then I'd fling the door open and start shooting everyone as they ran away in terror. I wanted them to feel the same fear they'd inflicted on me. I wanted to hurt them like they'd hurt me. But most of all, I wanted them to feel powerless like I'd felt. I wanted to feel control over just one thing in my life. As I started to squeeze the trigger, someone yelled that a car was coming, and the kids bolted from the porch and scattered. I was 1 second away, maybe even less than a second, from shooting my classmates. Meanwhile, they've gone about their lives. They're in their late 30s and early 40s now. They probably have kids of their own and have no idea they almost died that day. They have no idea that behind that door, a scared and angry 14-year-old pointed a gun at them and was only a moment away from pulling the trigger. I'm not proud of any of this. I am not typing any of this to glorify my behavior. I'm explaining what I did so you will understand that the gun problem in America is not a mental health problem. I was not mentally ill. The problem is access to firearms. If I'd had access to an AR-15 instead of a shotgun, I would have been quicker to pull the trigger. To my teenage mind, an AR-15 would have felt like the pinnacle of power. I would have felt awesome, like the characters I envied on TV and in video games. I would have felt like an Old Testament deity, and I would have used that power to kill my classmates. I have absolutely no doubt about this. So, that's kind of some heavy stuff. And as you can see, he was in his correct mind. His right mind when he was making the decision to get the gun, to point it at his bullies. And if he had fired, he would have fired in his right mind. There was something on TV, if any of you watch The Gifted, you'll know the character Polaris is bipolar. And she's not necessarily the greatest representation of someone who is bipolar, because she went into a manic episode and assassinated, I believe it was a senator. And although the show did say, you know, she knows what she's doing, or one of the girls, Clarice/Blink, said, "I've known people who are bipolar. Assassination attempts is not one of the symptoms." I think having the mentally ill character being portrayed as the violent one is really a step back for mental health representation in the media. And it's definitely contributing to this idea that mental illness is connected to gun violence. And I just want to say, you shouldn't be scared of us. We're not dangerous. Frankly, we're way more of a danger to ourselves than we are to you at all. Part of being mentally ill is self-harm and suicidal ideation. Like they said in The Gifted, assassination attempts are not one of the symptoms. Flying into a rage and killing someone is not a symptom of mental illness. Walking into a school with a fully loaded AR-15 and just unloading it on your classmates is not a symptom of mental illness. Was he mentally well or unwell? It's not my place to say. But the decision to open fire on your classmates, that is not a decision made specifically because of mental illness. The powerlessness that the would-be shooter, whose story I read, talked about is not an emotion that is exclusive to those of us who are mentally ill. That is a perfectly human emotion, and while it's not a pleasant one, it is absolutely normal. It's not like having paranoid delusions or hallucinations at all. It is completely normal, and that rage of wanting to hurt someone who hurt you back, I hate to say it because it makes me sound so cynical about human nature, but that is normal. Especially for a teenager whose brain isn't fully developed yet. Something about their prefrontal cortex is just not fully developed yet, and they're not able to make rational decisions, which I think does contribute to the fact that these teenagers decide to go shoot up their schools. These emotions are ones I think most, if not all of us, have experienced at some time. I mean, I know I felt powerless in my lifetime. I've wanted to hurt people who hurt me. And none of that is anything to do with the fact that I am mentally ill. It is the fact that I am human. The problem is not mental illness. In fact, the government's not even treating it like the problem's mental illness. Trump is taking away money that could be used for healthcare for mentally ill people. The government, they don't care about us. They don't want to help us. And that's harsh, but it's the reality of the situation. Reality is cruel. They don't care about us. They just want us to be a scapegoat so we don't solve the real problem. And the real problem is access to firearms. If you are a responsible gun owner, you keep your firearms in a locked box, not under your pillow. You keep them somewhere safe and secure, and you by no means allow your kid access to that, because kids, especially teenage boys, at their stage of development are violent and unpredictable. And if you cannot keep your child from taking your firearms and unloading it into his classmates, you are not a responsible gun owner. You do not deserve to have a gun. You do not... I don't know what else. You don't deserve to have a gun. I know there's been a push for gun control, having to take a psych test, I think, would be really important, not to check for mental illness, but to check for those feelings of just rage and vengeance. I live in Texas. Did you know that there are no law restrictions on the age at which you can own a gun? I mean, you might not be able to walk into the store and buy a gun. I'm not an expert on gun law, so I'm sure a 10-year-old kid couldn't just walk into a store and buy a gun, but say taking your 10-year-old kid to the shooting range and letting them use your gun to shoot at targets, perfectly legal. And that sounds harmless enough, but I've shot guns before. I know the rush it gives you, and introducing that feeling to children that young, that feeling of just sheer power and control, that is a dangerous thing to do. Kids and teenagers are not ready to handle the kind of responsibility that shooting a gun requires you to have. I mean, let's face it, teenagers are immature. We all know that. We've all been through high school. I mean, if you haven't been through public high school, then you missed the horror that is immature teenagers. And, I mean, I was always very mature for my age, but I had my moments. I wasn't able to be a fully mature adult because I wasn't And yet our culture just pretty much thrusts adulthood onto teens pretty much as soon as they hit junior high. I mean, you take TV shows these days that are just directed at these children, showing children their age functioning as, you know, mature adults would, and that is part of the problem as well. We treat kids like adults. Kids aren't adults. And they should have absolutely zero access to firearms. Now, this doesn't even account for the times a mass shooting has been committed by an adult who I think definitely has to be a psychopath if you're an adult and you're committing a crime like this. So this is where I think really comprehensive psych tests would come in handy in gun control laws. But, you know, the truth is people love their easy access to guns. People want to arm the teachers. Have you seen a teacher who's just at the end of their rope just snap? I don't want my teachers to have a gun. I don't want to die. I don't want to accidentally say the one thing that tips them over the edge and causes them to open fire on their own class. I mean, teachers are harsh people. I learned that in high school. My economics teacher told us in the event of a school shooting that she was going to line all of us up by the door so that we would die first. So, if you think your high school teacher cares about you, then you probably have one of the rare good ones out there. But, like I said, teachers are rough and stressed and angry and under a lot of pressure, and the absolute last thing I want to do is put a gun in their hand. And I mean, so you arm the teachers, that's not going to stop school shootings. All that's going to happen is teachers are going to be killed trying to stop the school shooter by trying to take action into their own hands, because teachers are not trained to take down terrorists. And I think it's important that we use the word terrorist to describe mass shooters. My throat is getting really dry from talking a lot. Totally lost my train of thought. If you're one of those people who says guns don't kill people, people kill people, then I want you to just think about this. Who cares if North Korea is stockpiling nukes? I don't know why I stuttered when I said that. I'm totally klutzy when I speak. I trip over my words. Who cares if North Korea is stockpiling nukes? Nukes don't kill people. People kill people. Yeah, with nukes. With guns. The gun gives you the advantage to kill a person. And frankly, blaming it on us is just offensive, it's dangerous. It puts us in danger, because if we say, oh, the shooter was mentally ill, and say a schizophrenic starts showing symptoms in public, people are going to get scared. And you know what happens when people get scared? They fight. Even if there's nothing there to fight, they will create a problem where there is none, and they will fight about it. So anytime you guys, and I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, anytime you guys would like to stop saying the school shooter was mentally ill, he was mentally ill, he was mentally ill, you are putting us in danger, because people start to think that we're a danger when we're not. We are, like I said, more likely to be on the receiving end of violence, and we are way, way, way more likely to harm ourselves than to harm another person. And unfortunately, that is not the way the media really portrays mentally ill people, but it is the truth, coming from one of the crazy kids. We are not dangerous. So stop associating us with these people who clearly just show no conscience and no remorse. And apparently, I've seen talk that the Florida shooter was sorry about what he had done. Sorry doesn't bring people back from the dead. It doesn't. And instead of saying, oh, well, he was mentally ill, we need to be saying, oh, well, he was a terrorist. Because that is the proper label. That is what is really going on. It's not an uncontrollable act of mental illness rage. It is a controlled act of that feeling of vengeance. It's controlled. You make a choice. You don't just accidentally shoot up your school the way when I'm manic I might accidentally max out my credit card. If you shoot up your school, I hate to say it, but you are in your right mind. You know the consequences of what you're doing. So you do not get to blame mental illness. You do not get to throw the rest of us who are quite peaceful under the bus just because you're white and because people don't want to solve the gun problem. Like I said, they don't care about us. Government, we are their scapegoat, and that needs to change. So thank you guys for listening to my little rant. It did get a little political, but I'm really angry about the way that we try and write school shooters off as, oh, they were mentally ill. We don't have a gun problem. We have a mental health problem. We have both. Okay, Karen? We have a mental health problem and a gun problem, and the two problems are completely unrelated to each other and being completely ignored by the government. Government doesn't care. They don't care about us. I guess that's like the takeaway from this video. The government doesn't care. So, like I said, thank you for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, then congratulations. You are my favorite person. If you like my video, give me a thumbs up. If you don't like my video, give me a thumbs down, which I will ignore because this is my opinion, and I frankly, if you disagree with it, don't care. And you're probably a part of the problem. Comment, tell me your thoughts down below. If you're not subscribed, then do subscribe. I am like 0% political in all of my other videos, and I talk about bipolar disorder, anxiety, avoidant personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder, and occasionally ADHD. And by occasionally, I mean like once, but I'm hoping to do more in the future. So thank you again for watching this, and I will catch y'all in the next video.